Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's bear attack stories, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We'll bring stories from areas near you. Now let's get into the first case. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering sequoias as I guided my Ford Ranger along the winding park road. The autumn air flowing through my open window carried the crisp scent of pine and decay, a reminder that winter wasn't far off. Lodgepole Campground's entrance sign emerged from the shadows, weathered wood bearing warnings about proper food storage and bear safety. My truck's tires crunched over fallen pine needles as I pulled into the nearly deserted campground. The emptiness wasn't surprising for a Tuesday in October, but the absolute silence made my skin prickle. The only movement came from fallen leaves dancing across the packed dirt road. The ranger station's window reflected the golden sunlight as I approached. Inside, Ranger Johnson looked up from his paperwork, his weathered face creasing into a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Lodgepole. Planning to stay the night?" he asked, reaching for a clipboard. "Yes, just one night," I replied, accepting the pen he offered. "Site 14, if it's available." His eyes flickered to my empty passenger seat, then to the solo camping permit I was filling out. "Camping alone?" I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. I needed some time to clear my head. Work's been intense lately. Ranger Johnson's expression shifted subtly. "We don't get many solo campers this time of year." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Bears are pretty active right now, building up fat reserves for winter. Had 3 incidents this month already. I've got bear spray." I patted my jacket pocket. "And I know the protocol. Keep food in bear-proof containers. Maintain distance if I spot one." He nodded slowly. "Good. Make sure you store anything scented, not just food. Toothpaste, deodorant, even lip balm. Bears have excellent noses." He handed me a bear-proof container, its scratched surface testament to previous uses. "Remember, if you encounter a black bear, make yourself big, make noise, and don't run. Running triggers their chase instinct." "Got it," I said, accepting the container. The metal felt cold against my palms. "One more thing," he added as I turned to leave. "Cell service is spotty out here. Emergency radio is at the main shelter if you need it." Back at my truck, I drove to Site 14, the furthest from the main road. The massive sequoias created deep shadows that seemed to reach for my vehicle. I parked and began unpacking, my movements methodical and purposeful, just like the YouTube videos on camp safety had shown. The tent went up first, its blue nylon bright against the darkening forest. Every stake driven into the hard ground echoed through the empty campground. I organized my supplies with careful precision, separating items that needed to go in the bear container from those that could stay in the tent. A crow called overhead, its harsh cry making me jump. "Get it together," I muttered to myself, hands trembling slightly as I checked my bear spray's safety mechanism for the 3rd time. The metal canister was reassuringly solid, though I hoped I wouldn't need to use it. The temperature dropped noticeably as the sun dipped behind the ancient trees. I zipped up my jacket and gathered my food supplies, carrying them to the bear container station 20 yards from my tent. The container's latch clicked shut with a finality that made my stomach clench. Back at the campsite, I got a small fire going in the designated pit, more for comfort than warmth. The flames cast shifting shadows on the surrounding trees, making them seem to move in my peripheral vision. I kept turning my head, startled by imagined movements in the growing darkness. The purple dusk deepened to indigo as I sat by the fire, eating a sandwich and trying to convince myself this solo trip was a good idea. The forest's natural sounds, creaking branches, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, grew more pronounced in the gathering night. "Just the wind," I whispered, watching shadows dance at the edge of my campsite. "Just the wind and the trees." The fire died down to glowing embers, and the cold drove me toward my tent. I changed quickly into thermal layers, my breath visible in the beam of my headlamp. The sleeping bag welcomed me with synthetic warmth, but sleep felt distant as I lay there, listening to the forest's night chorus. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. My body tensed, ears straining to catch any follow-up sound. Nothing but the subtle rustling of leaves in the light breeze. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to remember Ranger Johnson's assured tone when discussing bear encounters. "They're more afraid of you than you are of them," I recited quietly, though in the darkness of my tent, those words felt hollow. My watch showed 9:47 p.m. The night stretched ahead, long and dark. I checked my phone, no service, just as Ranger Johnson had warned. The screen's blue glow felt comforting until I turned it off, the darkness rushing back in even deeper than before. Sleep came in fits and starts, each forest sound jolting me back to alertness. The temperature continued to drop, and I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders. The nylon walls of my tent seemed impossibly thin, a fragile barrier between me and whatever moved in the night beyond. As exhaustion finally began to pull me under, a last coherent thought drifted through my mind. In the morning, this night would just be another story about letting my imagination run wild in the dark. I had no idea how wrong I was. The digital display of my watch read 2:13 a.m. when the first sound cut through my restless sleep. A sharp crack, like a dry branch giving way under significant weight. My eyes snapped open in the absolute darkness of the tent, my breath catching in my throat. Crunch, crunch. Heavy footsteps on fallen leaves, methodical and deliberate, somewhere behind my tent. My hand instinctively reached for the flashlight beside my sleeping bag, but I stopped myself from turning it on. Years of camping experience and ranger warnings echoed in my mind. Don't attract unnecessary attention. "Hello," I called out weakly, hoping against hope it was just another camper taking a late-night walk. My voice sounded thin and fragile in the cold air. The footsteps stopped. Then came the sniffing, deep, powerful inhalations that made my heart skip beats. The sound moved slowly around the perimeter of my tent, accompanied by the soft scraping of claws on pine needles. Each breath seemed to draw in everything. The scent of my fear, the lingering traces of my dinner, the artificial smell of my synthetic sleeping bag. I lay perfectly still, my own breathing shallow and controlled, fighting the urge to panic. Through the thin nylon walls of my tent, a massive shadow passed before my eyes, blocking out what little ambient light filtered through from the stars. My trembling hand found the bear spray, clutching it like a lifeline. A deep, guttural snort broke the silence, so close it could have been inside the tent. The sound was distinctly ursine, nothing like a human or any smaller animal. The shadow moved again, and in the dim light, I could make out the unmistakable profile. Rounded ears, thick neck, powerful shoulders. "Hey, bear," I whispered, my voice quavering despite my attempt to sound confident. The rangers had said to make your presence known, to avoid startling them. "Move along, bear. Nothing here for you." The bear's response was another deep sniff, followed by a low rumble that vibrated through the ground beneath my sleeping bag. I could see its breath condensing in the cold air through the tent fabric, creating small clouds that dissipated in the darkness. My free hand fumbled for my phone. The screen's sudden brightness felt like a spotlight in the darkness. Still no service. The emergency radio was in the main shelter, might as well have been on another planet. The shadow shifted, and two eyes caught the phone's light, reflecting an eerie greenish yellow through the tent wall. They were positioned about 4 feet off the ground, meaning this was no small bear. The analytical part of my brain, the part still functioning through the fear, estimated the animal must weigh at least 300 pounds. "Don't run, don't run, don't run." I repeated the mantra silently, remembering Ranger Johnson's warning. Running would trigger the bear's predatory instincts. But as the massive form began to circle my tent more quickly, that primal urge to flee grew nearly overwhelming. A new sound joined the heavy breathing and footsteps, claws scraping against the tent's rain fly, almost experimental. The bear was testing the strange structure that had appeared in its territory. Each scratch sent shivers down my spine, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet forest. "Go away," I shouted suddenly, trying to sound intimidating. My voice cracked on the second word. The bear paused momentarily. In that brief silence, I could hear other forest sounds. An owl's distant call, the rustle of wind through sequoia branches far above, my own heart pounding in my ears. Then the scratching resumed, more purposeful this time. I pressed myself against the far side of the tent. Bear spray pointed toward the sounds. The ranger's instructions ran through my head. Wait until the bear is within 20 feet. Aim slightly down to account for spray rise. Short bursts, not one long spray. The investigating turned to pushing, the bear's massive weight pressing against the tent walls. The aluminum poles bent but held for now. I could smell its wild, musky odor, a mix of wet fur, earth, and something uniquely predatory that sparked ancient fears in my hindbrain. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. The bear froze. For a moment, I dared to hope it would leave, spooked by the human sound. Instead, the pressure against the tent increased. The bear's snuffling grew more intense, focused now on the tent's entrance. The zipper rattled slightly with each powerful breath. I watched in horror as the shadow lowered itself, powerful shoulders bunching as it prepared to investigate more aggressively. The first scrape of claws against the tent's entrance didn't tear through, not yet. It was almost gentle, exploratory. The second swipe pressed harder, and I heard threads beginning to snap. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know who or what I was pleading with. The bear spray shook in my grip as I aimed it toward the entrance. "Please, no." The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind died down, leaving nothing but the sound of my heartbeat and the bear's heavy breathing. In that moment of terrible clarity, I knew with certainty that my tent, my fragile nylon shelter, was about to become the scene of a struggle I might not survive. The third swipe of claws began to tear through the fabric, and my world exploded into chaos. Time crystallized into razor-sharp fragments as the tent collapsed around me. The ripping sound of claws through nylon filled my ears, followed by the rush of cold mountain air. My world turned sideways as the aluminum poles gave way, wrapping me in a shroud of twisted fabric. "Help!" The scream tore from my throat before I could stop it, echoing through the empty campground. "Somebody help!" The bear's hot breath hit my face through the shredded tent wall, carrying the unmistakable smell of wild meat and decay. I could feel its weight pressing down as massive paws searched through the collapsed shelter, trying to reach the source of movement within. All my careful preparation, all the ranger's instructions, evaporated in a surge of blind panic. My sleeping bag had become a cotton prison, tangling around my legs as I desperately tried to scramble backward. Each movement seemed to attract the bear's attention more, its powerful paws now tearing purposefully at the layers between us. "Hey, bear!" My voice cracked with terror. "Get back! Get dash!" The words transformed into a scream as claws found my right calf. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, not the sharp slice I expected, but a deep, crushing sensation followed by the wet warmth of blood. The bear's claws tore through muscle like it was wrapping paper, leaving 4 parallel lines of fire across my leg. I thrashed wildly, finally freeing myself from the sleeping bag. The tent fabric parted completely, revealing the night sky above and, silhouetted against it, the massive form of the black bear. In the moonlight, I could see every detail with horrifying clarity. The raised hackles along its spine, the muscles rippling under thick fur, the steam of its breath in the cold air. It was larger than I'd imagined, standing at least 6 feet tall on its hind legs. The bear swayed slightly, evaluating me with small, intelligent eyes that reflected the moonlight. My blood darkened its front claws. "Oh God," I whispered, the words a prayer or a curse. I wasn't sure which. "Please." The bear dropped to all fours and moved closer, its head lowering to investigate my injured leg. I could feel its breath on my torn flesh, sending waves of pain and revulsion through my body. This close, I could see the individual hairs of its muzzle, the wetness of its nose, the yellowed edges of its teeth. Every wilderness survival show I'd ever watched flashed through my mind. Play dead for grizzlies, fight back against black bears. This was definitely a black bear, but my body seemed incapable of doing anything except trembling. My hand brushed against something solid. The bear spray. It had fallen beside me when the tent collapsed. With trembling fingers, I wrapped my hand around the canister, fumbling with the safety clip. The bear's head snapped up at my movement, its lips pulling back to reveal more teeth. A deep growl vibrated through the ground, through my bones, through the very air. This was no bluff charge or curious investigation anymore. This was a predator preparing to finish what it had started. As the bear rose again to its full height, I finally managed to remove the safety clip. Time seemed to slow down as the massive animal began to descend toward me. Paws extended, claws gleaming with my blood in the moonlight. "Please work," I gasped, and discharged the spray directly into the bear's face. The effect was instantaneous. The capsaicin cloud caught the bear full in the eyes and nose, turning its downward strike into a rear of agony. The spray created a reddish mist in the moonlight, carrying with it a sharp, chemical smell that made my own eyes water. The bear's roar of pain shattered the night's silence, sending nearby birds exploding from the trees in panic. It staggered backward, massive paws wiping frantically at its face, spreading the burning spray further into its eyes and nose. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Running might trigger its chase instinct, but staying meant certain death. Using a nearby tree for support, I pulled myself to my feet. My injured leg buckled immediately, sending spikes of pain shooting up to my hip, but adrenaline kept me upright. Through tears, from fear, pain, or the drifting pepper spray, I couldn't tell. I watched the bear thrashing in agony. Its powerful body slammed against a nearby tree, still trying to escape the burning sensation. Bits of my shredded tent clung to its fur, fluttering like blue battle flags in the moonlight. Blood was flowing freely down my leg now, soaking into my sock and boot. Each heartbeat sent a fresh pulse of warmth down my calf. The rational part of my brain knew I needed to assess the damage, to stop the bleeding, to call for help. But the primitive part, the part that recognized I was prey in this moment, screamed only one thing: run. For a moment that felt like eternity, I stood frozen, watching the bear's desperate attempts to clear its airways. Our eyes met briefly across the demolished campsite, predator and prey, connected by pain and fear and the ancient dance of survival. Then the spell broke. The bear stumbled away from my campsite, still rubbing its face against the ground and vegetation. Its agonized huffs grew fainter as it crashed through the underbrush, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. I didn't wait to see if it would return. My truck was 30 yards away, an impossible distance on my injured leg, but I had no choice. Behind me, I could still hear the bear's pained movements through the forest. Taking a deep breath, I turned toward my vehicle and began the longest 30 yards of my life. Every step was agony. Blood squelched in my boot as I half ran, half stumbled through the campsite, leaving a dark trail on the fallen leaves behind me. The bear's confused growls still echoed through the trees, but I couldn't tell if they were getting closer or farther away. The pain made everything distant and distorted. "Keys, keys, keys," I muttered through clenched teeth, patting my pockets with trembling hands. The familiar shape wasn't there. Of course not. They were in my jacket, and my jacket was back in the shredded tent. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness behind me. I froze, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The sound of my ragged breathing seemed impossibly loud in the night air. "Please, no," I whispered, forcing myself to turn and look back at the campsite. The moonlight revealed the devastation. My tent reduced to shredded blue fabric, sleeping bag torn and scattered, gear strewn across the ground. And there, barely visible among the chaos, was my jacket. Another growl rolled through the forest, closer this time. The bear was recovering from the spray. My legs screamed in protest as I limped back to the destruction. Each step left a bloody footprint on the pale pine needles. I spotted my jacket half buried under the tent's remains, reaching for it with shaking hands. The fabric was damp with dew and blood. The keys jingled as I searched the pockets, the sound almost musical in its normalcy. Then they slipped from my trembling fingers, disappearing into the wreckage of my campsite. No, no, no. Panic rose in my throat as I dropped to my knees, ignoring the fresh wave of pain from my injured leg. My fingers scrabbled through the torn fabric and scattered gear. Where were they? They had to be here somewhere. A heavy crash in the underbrush made me look up. Through the trees, I could make out movement. A large, dark shape weaving unsteadily between the trunks. The bear spray hadn't driven it away completely. It was still too close, and it was moving in my direction. My searching hands finally closed around the cold metal of my keys. Relief flooded through me, immediately replaced by a new wave of terror as I saw how close the bear had gotten. Its fur was matted where it had rubbed its face against the ground, and even from this distance, I could hear its labored breathing. I pushed myself up, using a nearby tree for support. The movement caught the bear's attention. It turned toward me, and even through its pepper spray-induced confusion, I could see recognition in its eyes. Predator remembering its prey. The distance to my truck seemed to stretch impossibly far. I knew I couldn't outrun a healthy black bear. Their top speed was around 35 miles per hour. But this one was disoriented, its coordination affected by the spray. It was my only chance. I half ran, half hopped toward my Ford Ranger, my injured leg barely taking any weight. The keys shook so violently in my hand that I dropped them again as I reached the driver's door. The metallic clang as they hit the ground seemed to echo through the entire campground. Come on, I pleaded, snatching them up. Behind me, I could hear the bear moving through the campsite, its powerful form pushing through the undergrowth with increasing purpose. The key missed the lock once, twice, scraping against the metal door. My vision blurred with tears of pain and fear. On the third try, it slid home. The door's hinges creaked as I yanked it open, throwing myself into the driver's seat. My bloody hands left smears on the steering wheel as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene from my worst nightmares. The bear had emerged from the treeline, its massive form caught in the harsh glare of my high beams. Blood matted the fur around its muzzle. Whether from rubbing its face after the spray or from my leg, I couldn't tell. It squinted in the sudden light, raising one paw as if to shield its irritated eyes. For a moment, we stared at each other through the windshield, human and bear, neither of us quite believing what had happened. Then the bear took a step forward, and I slammed the transmission into reverse. Gravel sprayed from my tires as I backed up, quickly shifting into drive to speed down the campground road. My injured leg throbbed with each pulse of the accelerator, but I pressed it down harder. Trees whipped past my windows, branches scraping against the truck's sides. In my rearview mirror, the bear was already lost in the darkness. All I could see was the empty road behind me, winding through the ancient sequoias. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I navigated the sharp turns, probably driving too fast for the conditions, but I couldn't bring myself to slow down. The "Thank you for visiting Lodgepole Campground" sign flashed past in my headlights. Only then did I let myself breathe, really breathe, for what felt like the first time since the attack. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by waves of pain from my leg and the beginning of shock. I needed a hospital. The nearest one was in Three Rivers, about an hour away. As I turned onto the main park road, I caught one last glimpse of the campground in my mirror. In the pre-dawn darkness, it looked peaceful, undisturbed. No one would guess what had just happened there. The only evidence was the trail of blood drops leading to my truck, and the morning rain would wash those away. The emergency room lights buzzed overhead with fluorescent intensity, making everything seem surreal after the darkness of the forest. I sat on the examination table, my torn and bloody pant leg cut away, trying to explain what had happened to Sarah, the night nurse, who kept glancing at me with barely concealed skepticism. "So you were camping alone?" She made a note on her tablet, her expression neutral but her tone carrying a hint of judgment. "In bear country? In October?" "Yes," I replied, too exhausted to defend my decisions. The adrenaline had completely worn off, leaving me shaking and nauseated. My leg throbbed with each heartbeat, the the 4 parallel gashes angry and deep. "And you're sure it was a black bear?" She looked up from her tablet. "Not a mountain lion or maybe a large dog?" I closed my eyes, seeing again the massive form silhouetted in my headlights. It was a black bear, at least 6 feet tall when it stood up. I used bear spray on it. That's how I got away. She pursed her lips, about to ask another question, when Dr. Martinez walked in. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and steady hands. "Let's take a look at these wounds," he said, pulling up a rolling stool. His gentle probe of the injury made me grip the edges of the examination table. "These are definitely ursine claw marks. Clean but deep. You're lucky. A few millimeters deeper and we'd be looking at severe muscle damage." The local anesthetic he injected around the wounds was almost as painful as the initial injury, but blessed numbness followed. I watched with detached fascination as he began cleaning the gashes. "How many stitches?" I asked, trying to focus on technical details instead of the memory of those claws tearing through my flesh. "I'm counting about 20 per laceration," Dr. Martinez replied, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "We'll do internal and external sutures. The muscle layer needs to be repaired first, then the skin." He looked up at me. "You'll have some impressive scars, but with proper care, you should regain full mobility." The clock on the wall read 4:37 a.m. when Officer Pete Wilson arrived. He was a local police officer, probably in his 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd heard every possible story about everything. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" He pulled out a small notepad, clicking his pen. "Just need to file a report about the incident." I nodded, watching Dr. Martinez work on the 3rd laceration. The numbness was starting to wear off. "Walk me through what happened," Officer Wilson said, his pen poised. "Start from when you first noticed the bear." I recounted the events, trying to stick to the facts. The sounds of approach, the tent being torn open, the spray, the escape. With each detail, his eyebrows rose slightly higher. "And you didn't have any food in your tent?" he asked, making another note. "Nothing that might have attracted it?" "No, everything was in the bear container, 20 yards from the site, just like the rangers said." My voice cracked with frustration. "I followed all the procedures." He wrote something else down. "And you're certain it was Dash?" The emergency room doors swung open, cutting him off. Ranger Johnson strode in, still in his uniform, looking like he hadn't slept. His face was grim as he took in my injured leg. "There have been 3 black bears spotted regularly in that area," he said without preamble. "One of them is a larger male, around 300 pounds. Been getting bolder about approaching campsites." He turned to Officer Wilson. "This matches the pattern we've been seeing." The officer's skepticism seemed to fade slightly. He made a few more notes, then closed his notebook. "I'll file the report. Fish and Wildlife might want to follow up." "They already know," Ranger Johnson replied. "But by the time they get here," he shrugged. "Rain's already washing away any tracks." Dr. Martinez finished the last suture and began applying antibiotics and bandages. "You'll need to come back in 2 weeks to have these removed. Watch for any signs of infection, redness, swelling, increased pain. The prescriptions I'm giving you are for antibiotics and pain management." I nodded, the room starting to spin slightly. The pain medication they'd given me earlier was making everything feel distant and hazy. "The incident report needs your signature," Officer Wilson said, holding out a form. I scrawled something approximating my name at the bottom, the letters swimming before my eyes. "Get some rest," Ranger Johnson advised, his voice softening. "We'll handle the paperwork. Your campsite, well, we'll collect what we can once it's light." The morning sun was just beginning to lighten the hospital windows as they helped me into a wheelchair. "Standard protocol," they said. Sarah, the night nurse who had doubted my story earlier, now looked at me with something like respect as she handed me my discharge papers. "The bears were here first," she said quietly. "Sometimes we forget that, camping in their territory. You're lucky to be alive." As they wheeled me toward the hospital exit, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Pale face, wild eyes, hair matted with sweat and pine needles. I looked like exactly what I was. Someone who had stared death in the face and somehow walked away. But as the automatic doors slid open to the cool morning air, I knew this wasn't over. The physical wounds would heal, leaving only scars to mark their passage. The other wounds, the ones that would wake me in the night with phantom sounds of ripping canvas and hot breath, those would take longer to fade. The incident report would be filed away, becoming just another statistic in the park's records. But I would carry this night with me forever, marked in both flesh and memory. The morning rain fell in a steady drizzle, washing away the last physical traces of my encounter with the bear. I sat in Ranger Johnson's truck, leg throbbing despite the pain medication, watching through foggy windows as he and 2 other rangers examined what remained of my campsite. "The rain's not helping," Ranger Johnson called out, crouching to examine some marks in the mud. "But you can still see where it charged through here." He pointed to a section of trampled undergrowth, now slowly filling with water. My shredded tent lay in blue heaps across the wet ground, more resembling waterlogged trash than camping equipment. One of the rangers, Peterson, according to his name tag, photographed each piece of evidence methodically. The torn tent, the scattered gear, the now empty bear spray canister. "Found some hair," the third ranger announced, carefully placing dark strands into a small evidence bag, caught on what's left of the tent poles. "Probably won't tell us much, but fish and wildlife might want it." A white SUV pulled up to the campsite, and a woman in a rain jacket emerged, notepad already in hand. "Jenny Parker, 3 Rivers Gazette," she introduced herself, hurrying over to my window. "Mind if I ask you a few questions about the attack?" I rolled down the window slightly, the cold rain misting my face. "There's not much to tell beyond what's in the incident report." Her pen was already moving across the wet paper. "Witnesses say they heard screaming around 2 a.m. Can you describe the bear's behavior? Was it acting unusually aggressive? Had you seen it earlier in the day?" "No previous sighting," I replied wearily. "It just appeared, tore through the tent. I used bear spray and got away." Jenny's enthusiasm dimmed slightly at my brief responses. "But surely there must be more detail? Our readers love wilderness survival stories. Man versus nature, life and death struggles." "Look," I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "It wasn't some epic battle. It was terrifying and painful, and I got lucky. That's all." Ranger Johnson noticed the exchange and walked over. "Ms. Parker, we've already issued a statement about increased bear activity in the area. This incident is still under investigation." "But surely," she began, "and the rain's washing away what little evidence we have," he added firmly. "So, if you'll excuse us." She retreated to her vehicle, but not before taking several photos of the destroyed campsite with her phone. The morning light and rain probably made it look almost artistic, the shreds of blue nylon against the dark forest floor, the scattered remnants of ordinary life torn apart by wilderness. Peterson approached the truck window, holding up my ruined tent and sleeping bag in evidence bags. "We'll need to keep these for documentation," he said apologetically. "But honestly, they're beyond salvaging anyway." I nodded, watching as they photographed the blood trails, what remained of them after the rain, leading from the tent to where my truck had been parked. The dark drops were already fading into the wet ground, erasing the path of my desperate escape. "Take a look at this," Ranger Johnson called out, waving us over to a trail camera strapped to a nearby tree. He pressed a few buttons on its display, showing footage from the previous weeks. "We've had 3 different black bears on camera in this area." The grainy nighttime footage showed various bears moving through the campsite. One clip captured a particularly large male marking a tree, the same one I'd used to pull myself up after the attack. "Could be the same one," Peterson remarked, studying the image. "Size matches your description, but without better evidence. Track casting's impossible in this rain," the third ranger added, looking at the muddy ground. "And even if we could identify the specific bear, fish and wildlife probably wouldn't relocate it." Not enough evidence of purposeful aggression. I understood the bureaucracy of it all, but my throbbing leg protested the notion that the attack hadn't been purposeful enough. Still, I knew this was how things worked in the interface between wilderness and civilization. Nature operated by its own rules, regardless of our attempts to document and categorize it. The rangers finished their documentation as the rain continued to fall. My campsite slowly disappeared under their methodical collection of evidence, each piece being photographed, bagged, and labeled. The incident report would join countless others in park records. Another human-wildlife encounter, notable only for its relative rarity and lack of fatality. "We're about done here," Ranger Johnson said, closing his evidence log. "Need a ride back to your truck at the hospital?" I nodded, taking one last look at the campsite. In a few days, new campers would set up their tents here, completely unaware of what had happened. The forest would reclaim any remaining signs of the struggle, the rain washing away the last traces of blood and bear spray. "One more thing," Peterson said, approaching with his camera. "Mind if I photograph your injuries? For the report." I rolled up my pant leg, revealing the bandages underneath. The medical gauze was clean and white, betraying nothing of the savage gashes beneath. This too would fade with time, leaving only scars to prove it had happened at all. As we drove away from Lodgepole Campground, I caught glimpses of warning signs being posted at the entrance. Caution. Increased bear activity in this area. Soon, my attack would become just another cautionary tale, a brief mention in the park's safety orientation. The rain intensified, drumming on the truck's roof. Through the downpour, the forest looked peaceful, primeval, untouched by the violence of the previous night. Somewhere in those wet, green depths, a black bear was going about its day, following instincts as old as the ancient sequoias themselves. The evidence might wash away, but we both carried marks of our encounter, my scars, and whatever lingering effect the bear spray had left. The only difference was that I would remember, while the bear had already forgotten. Just a little further, Sarah, my physical therapist, encouraged as I worked through another set of calf raises. Focus on maintaining control through the full range of motion. 3 weeks had passed since the attack, and I was in my 4th PT session at Valley Medical Center. The 4 parallel scars on my leg were healing well, pink and tender against my skin, but the muscle beneath still protested any serious exertion. "Good," Sarah said as I completed the set. "You're getting stronger. The tissue is responding well to the exercises." She made some notes on her tablet. "Any numbness or tingling along the scars?" "Sometimes," I admitted, lowering myself onto the treatment table. "More when I first wake up. And at night when—" I trailed off, not wanting to admit how often I woke up in cold sweats, the sound of ripping canvas echoing in my ears. Sarah looked up from her tablet, her expression softening with understanding. "That's normal, you know," she said gently. "Trauma affects us both physically and mentally. Have you considered talking to someone about—" "I'm fine," I interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "It's just taking some time to process everything." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't convinced. "Well, let's work on your range of motion. Any pain when I do this?" She carefully manipulated my ankle, watching my face for signs of discomfort. The physical therapy sessions blurred together, marking time like stations of the cross. Stretching, strengthening, manual therapy, ice. Each week brought incremental improvements, my body slowly knitting itself back together. But other wounds proved harder to heal. At night, I'd jolt awake in my apartment, heart racing, convinced I could hear heavy breathing outside my bedroom window. The rational part of my brain knew I was 15 miles from the nearest bear habitat, but terror doesn't listen to reason. My camping gear remained untouched in the garage, collecting dust. I'd ordered new equipment online, a tent, sleeping bag, the basics, but the boxes sat unopened, silent accusations of my newfound cowardice. The sight of the bear vault container, still carrying scuff marks from that night, was enough to send my heart rate skyrocketing. "You should come camping with us next weekend," my friend Mike suggested over coffee one morning. "Just a quick overnight at Lake Kauai." No bears there, I promise. I forced a laugh, ignoring the way my hands tightened around my coffee cup. Can't. Physical therapy. The weekend after, then? He persisted, not understanding why I kept declining. The fall colors are amazing right now. Maybe later, I muttered, changing the subject. How could I explain that the thought of sleeping in a tent, any tent, made me break out in cold sweats? The scars were healing well, Dr. Martinez assured me during my follow-up appointment. The tissue is strong, he said, examining the marks. You're lucky. Black bears have incredibly powerful claws, a few millimeters deeper. I didn't need him to finish the sentence. I'd spent enough sleepless nights imagining all the ways it could have been worse. My apartment became a fortress of artificial light and urban comfort. I kept the windows closed at night, even during the Indian summer heat wave that hit the valley. The sounds of the city, traffic, sirens, human voices became a lullaby of civilization, keeping the wilderness at bay. Friends and family gradually stopped asking about the attack. The initial concern and fascination faded, replaced by awkward silences when I flinched at unexpected movements or declined outdoor invitations. My sister was the only one who seemed to understand. Give yourself time, she said during one of our weekly calls. No one expects you to bounce right back from something like that. It's been almost 2 months, I replied, staring out my window at the safety of suburban streets. I should be over it by now. Says who? Her voice was gentle but firm. There's no timeline for processing trauma. The bears might have forgotten, but you're allowed to remember. The physical therapy exercises became a ritual, a way to mark progress in measurable increments. Each successful calf raise, each degree of improved flexibility, was a small victory over that night in the forest. Sarah noticed the change in my dedication. Your strength is almost back to normal, she said during one session, watching me work through a particularly challenging balance exercise. But you're pushing yourself hard. Maybe too hard. I caught my reflection in the gym's mirror. Determined expression, leg muscles trembling with effort, scars visible below my shorts. I need to be stronger, I said, more to myself than to her, in case it ever happens again. The best defense is prevention, she reminded me, which doesn't mean you can never go back into the woods. It just means being prepared, being smart, and maybe not going alone next time. That night, I dreamed of the bear again. But this time, instead of the usual terror and helplessness, I found myself standing my ground. The bear was still massive, still terrifying, but in the dream, I understood something I hadn't that night at Lodgepole. We were both just beings trying to survive in our own ways. I woke up shaking, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from fear. Looking at my leg in the gray morning light, I traced the scars with my fingers. They were part of me now, a permanent reminder of that night, but maybe they didn't have to be only a reminder of fear. The unopened camping gear in my garage could wait. For now, each small victory in physical therapy, each night of slightly better sleep was enough. The wilderness had marked me, but it hadn't broken me. That would have to be enough for now. 6 months after the ATT. I found myself driving the familiar winding road toward Sequoia National Park. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and the spring sunshine seemed to mock my anxiety. I hadn't planned this trip, hadn't even told anyone I was coming. But after another sleepless night filled with dreams of ripping canvas and hot breath, I knew I needed to face this. The Welcome to Sequoia National Park sign appeared ahead, and my stomach clenched. I almost turned around right there, but something kept my foot on the gas. The scars on my leg seemed to tingle as I passed through the park entrance. "Welcome back," the gate ranger said cheerfully, not recognizing me as she handed over my day pass. "Bear activity is moderate this time of year. Make sure to store food properly and carry bear spray if you're hiking." I managed a tight smile, the bear spray canister already within easy reach on my passenger seat. My therapist, yes, I'd finally started seeing one, had called this exposure therapy. I called it facing my demons, though I wasn't sure which was worse. The real bears in these woods or the ones in my memories. The road to Lodgepole Campground stretched before me like a path into my nightmares. As I rounded the final bend, my breath caught in my throat. There, through the trees, I could see Site 14. My site. Only now it wasn't mine anymore. A family was setting up camp in the exact spot where I'd fought for my life half a year ago. A father helped his teenage son hammer tent stakes into the ground while a younger daughter organized supplies. Their blue tent was eerily similar to the one that had been shredded that night. I pulled into a nearby turnout, killing the engine but unable to step out. The spring breeze carried the sounds of their casual conversation. "Dad, is this far enough from the bear box?" the son asked, adjusting a tent pole. "Looks good, Tommy. 20 yards, just like the ranger said." The father's voice was confident, unconcerned. "Been camping here for years. Never had any problems." I wanted to warn them, to tell them about the terror that could descend in the darkest part of night. But what would I say? That 6 months ago, in this very spot, I'd learned how thin the barrier between civilization and wilderness really was. That sometimes the ancient rules of predator and prey reassert themselves, despite all our careful preparations. The ranger station came into view as I drove past, and I saw Ranger Johnson's truck parked outside. He was probably reviewing summer staffing schedules, preparing for the busy season ahead. I didn't stop. I couldn't face his knowing look, his questions about my recovery. The road wound higher into the park, each familiar landmark triggering memories. There was the turnout where I'd parked that afternoon, checking my camping supplies one last time. The trail sign I'd photographed, planning hikes I'd never take. The visitor center where I'd watched the required safety video, feeling so prepared, so confident. A movement caught my eye, a black bear warning sign creaking slightly in the spring breeze. The yellow diamond seemed to mock me with its simple silhouette, as if the complexities of that night could be reduced to a simple warning symbol. My leg ached, a phantom pain that always intensified when I thought about the attack. The scars had healed cleanly, thanks to Dr. Martinez's skill, but they still stood out against my skin, for parallel lines that told a story few would believe. I pulled over at an overlook, needing a moment to steady myself. The view was spectacular, the great sequoias stretching toward the horizon, ancient and indifferent to human concerns. Somewhere in those woods, black bears were going about their lives, following instincts that had evolved long before humans started drawing boundaries on maps. A Park Service vehicle slowed as it passed, and I recognized Ranger Johnson behind the wheel. Our eyes met briefly through the windshield. He raised a hand in greeting but didn't stop. Perhaps he understood that some returns needed to be made alone. Taking a deep breath, I got back in my truck. The family at Site 14 was finished setting up now, their campsite looking painfully normal. The father was showing his kids how to properly latch the bear container, his voice carrying on the breeze. "Always double-check the lock," he was saying. "Bears are smarter than you'd think." You have no idea, I thought, putting my truck in gear. I'd come back, faced the place that haunted my dreams, but I wasn't ready to stay. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As I drove toward the park exit, I caught glimpses of other campsites through the trees. Each one told a story of families making memories, of outdoor adventures and connection with nature. My story was different, but it was mine. The scars proved that much, at least. The "thank you for visiting" sign appeared ahead, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. I'd done what I came to do, prove to myself that I could return, that the fear hadn't won completely. The memories would always be there, but maybe now they'd be tempered by this new experience. The simple act of driving through these woods and emerging on the other side. The park receded in my rearview mirror, the great sequoias standing sentinel as they had for centuries. They had witnessed countless interactions between humans and wildlife, countless stories of survival and loss. Mine was just one more, already fading into the forest's long memory. But I knew now that I could come back. Not to camp, not yet, maybe not ever, but to visit, to remember, to acknowledge both the beauty and the danger of this place. The bears would continue their ancient patterns, and humans would continue to enter their territory, and sometimes these worlds would collide in violent ways. I touched my leg where the scars lay hidden under my jeans. They were proof that I'd survived such a collision, and for now that was enough. I didn't expect to find myself sitting in the back of the Sequoia National Park Visitor Center, watching a new group of summer campers attend their mandatory safety briefing. Yet here I was, 1 year after the attack, observing as Ranger Peterson clicked through his PowerPoint presentation. Black bear encounters are rare, he was saying, but they do happen. Last year, we had several significant incidents in the park, including one serious injury at Lodgepole Campground. My hand unconsciously moved to my leg, feeling the raised lines of the scars through my jeans. On the screen, a diagram showed proper food storage techniques and campsite setup, the same procedures I'd followed meticulously that night. Remember, Peterson continued, gesturing to the bear-proof container displayed on the table, these aren't just guidelines. They're essential safety measures based on real incidents. A teenager in the front row raised his hand. Did anyone die from bear attacks last year? No fatalities, Peterson replied, his eyes briefly meeting mine at the back of the room. But there was a serious attack last October. The camper survived thanks to proper use of bear spray and quick thinking. Quick thinking, I thought with a bitter smile. More like blind panic and dumb luck. After the presentation, Peterson approached me as the crowd filed out. Didn't expect to see you here, he said quietly. Everything okay? I nodded, watching the last few visitors examining the bear safety displays. Just needed to see how the story's being told, I guess. Make some sense of it all. He understood. Your experience? It's helped us improve our safety protocols. That section about not assuming tents provide protection? That came directly from your incident report. A new family approached the information desk, and I heard fragments of their conversation with the ranger on duty. Heard about a huge bear in this area. Somebody got attacked last year. Is it safe to camp with kids? The ranger answered their questions calmly, professionally, without mentioning that the person who'd survived that attack was standing 20 feet away. My story had become part of the park's lore, stripped of personal details and transformed into a teaching tool. Later that afternoon, I found myself driving past the now familiar landmarks. The bear warning signs seemed to have multiplied since last year, or maybe I just noticed them more. A new one had been installed near Lodgepole. Warning: bears active in this area. Recent incidents reported. At the ranger station, I ran into Sarah, the night nurse who'd first treated me in the ER. She transferred to the park's medical unit for the summer season. Well, look who it is, she said warmly. How's the leg? Healed? I replied, rolling up my pant leg to show her the scars. Still aches when the weather changes, but otherwise. She nodded professionally. Clean healing. Dr. Martinez did good work. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. We've had 3 more bear encounters this season already. Nothing as serious as yours. But it keeps happening, I finished for her. Nature being nature. Exactly. She gestured to a new poster on the wall showing bear safety guidelines. Your case study is required reading now for all medical staff in the park. That's something, at least. The local coffee shop in Three Rivers still had my story pinned to their community board. A yellowed newspaper clipping from the Three Rivers Gazette. Local camper survives bear attack, the headline read. Below it, newer clippings reported other bear sightings, each one marked with a push pin on a rough map of the park. Folks still talk about it sometimes, the barista said, noticing my interest in the board. Especially when there's a new sighting. There was a big one spotted near Lodgepole just last week. Some say it might be the same bear. I sipped my coffee, remembering the massive shape in my headlights that night. Bears don't keep calendars, I said quietly. They just do what bears do. The sound of claws tearing through nylon still haunted my dreams occasionally, but less frequently now. The canvas of my memories had become like my scars, visible but faded. A story written on skin and psyche that grew dimmer with time. That evening, I sat in my truck at the park overlook, watching the sunset behind the sequoias. A family pulled up nearby, their car loaded with camping gear. Their young daughter pointed excitedly at something in the trees. Bear, she shouted. Dad, look! But it was just a shadow, a trick of the fading light. Her father laughed, but I noticed he checked their bear spray canister all the same. My story might have faded into park statistics, but its lessons lingered in small cautionary gestures like these. The bear safety presentation played on a loop in the visitor center, my attack reduced to a bullet point and a diagram. The rangers had done their best to extract useful lessons from that night. Proper food storage, the importance of bear spray, the limitations of tent walls as protection. But they couldn't convey the real lessons, the ones written in scars and sleepless nights. The understanding that wilderness isn't just a place on a map, but a state of being that exists wherever wild things follow their nature. The knowledge that survival sometimes comes down to luck as much as preparation. A year had passed, and my story had been absorbed into the greater narrative of the park. It served its purpose now as a warning, a teaching tool, a reminder that nature operates by its own rules. The bear, if it was still alive, had long since forgotten our encounter, continuing its ancient patterns through the forests. Only I carried the complete memory of that night, marked in flesh and etched in mind. The official reports documented the facts, but they couldn't capture the primal truth I'd learned, that sometimes the boundary between wilderness and civilization is as thin as a tent wall, and just as easily torn. 18 months after the attack, autumn had returned to Sequoia National Park. I sat in my park truck at a turnout on the main park road, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and purple. The temperature was dropping, perfect weather for bears building up their winter reserves. Movement caught my eye near the treeline. A massive black bear emerged from the forest, its fur gleaming in the dying light. My heart rate quickened, but the panic that would have once overwhelmed me had mellowed into something more like respectful caution. The bear moved with surprising grace for its size, ambling across the road about 50 yards ahead of my truck. It might have been the same one from that night, the size matched my memories, but there was no way to know for certain. In the golden sunset light, it looked neither malevolent nor benign, just wild. My hand instinctively moved to my leg, feeling the familiar ridges of scar tissue through my jeans. The physical therapy had done its job. I had full range of motion back. Only changes in weather brought occasional twinges now, my body's own personal barometer. "They get bigger every year," a voice said, making me jump. Ranger Johnson had pulled up beside my truck. His window rolled down. "That one's been spotted around here all week. No incidents, though. Just doing bear things." I nodded, watching the animal disappear into the undergrowth on the other side of the road. "Just doing bear things," I echoed softly. "Still camping?" he asked, though he surely knew the answer. "Not yet." I managed a small smile. "But I can drive through the park now. That's something." He looked like he wanted to say more, but just then his radio crackled to life. Another bear sighting near the visitor center. Different bear, different story. He gave me a small wave and drove off, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the deepening dusk. The incident report from my attack had probably gathered dust in some filing cabinet by now. Or maybe it was digital, just another data point in the park's wildlife encounter statistics. I'd requested a copy once, curious to see how they documented that night. The clinical language had almost made me laugh. Subject encountered an adult American black bear, Ursus americanus, while camping. Bear demonstrated investigative behavior leading to tent destruction and subsequent injury to subject's right leg. Subject successfully deployed counter-assault measures, bear spray, and retreated to vehicle. It couldn't capture the sound of claws through nylon, the hot breath in the darkness, the terrible clarity of those moments when civilization's illusions fell away. But maybe it didn't need to. Those memories were mine alone. I stepped out of my truck, feeling the cool evening air on my face. Near my feet, something caught my attention. Fresh bear scat on the ground. Recent, within the last hour. The bear I'd just seen had left its own mark on the landscape, just as permanent as my scars but far more ephemeral. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "You okay?" "No, it's that time of year." "I'm good," I typed back. "Just visiting an old friend." She'd understand the gallows humor. She'd been the one to suggest I see a trauma counselor to help me process not just the attack but its aftermath. The lingering jumpiness at unexpected sounds, the way my brain now categorized the world into potential shelter and potential exposure. The counseling had helped, but so had time. The nightmares had mostly faded. I could hear rustling leaves without immediately thinking of massive paws on pine needles. I'd even started hiking again, though never alone and always with bear spray close at hand. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I watched darkness creep through the sequoia grove. Somewhere out there, the bear was going about its evening routine, perhaps turning over logs for grubs or stripping late-season berries from bushes, following instincts that had evolved long before humans started drawing lines on maps and calling them park boundaries. My leg ached slightly, a storm coming in, probably. Dr. Martinez had said the scarring might always act as a weather predictor. Think of it as your own personal connection to the wilderness, he joked during my final checkup. The park's way of keeping in touch. I touched the scars one last time through my jeans, feeling their raised edges. They told a story, but not a simple one of victim and aggressor. Rather, they marked a moment when two worlds collided, the human and the wild, and left both parties changed. The bear had probably forgotten that night immediately, but the encounter had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. Climbing back into my truck, I took one last look at the spot where the bear had crossed. No trace remained of its passing, just as rain and time had erased all physical evidence of my own encounter. Tomorrow, new visitors would drive this road, set up their tents, store their food properly, and sleep uneasily in the darkness. Most would return home with nothing but photos and memories. But some, like me, would learn what I'd learned. That wilderness isn't just a place on a map. It's a state of being that exists wherever wild things follow their nature. That survival sometimes comes down to luck as much as preparation. That the line between civilization and wilderness is as thin as a tent wall, and just as easily torn. The first stars appeared above the sequoias as I started my engine. The bear was out there somewhere, neither good nor evil, just being what it was. And I was here, changed but whole, carrying my scars and my stories. Both of us just doing what came naturally now, the bear being a bear, and me being someone who understood finally what that really meant. It was enough. The dashboard clock reads 6:47 a.m. as I guide my Subaru Outback along the winding road leading to Thornton Gap entrance. Shenandoah National Park looms ahead, its autumn-painted slopes shrouded in dawn mist. I've done this drive dozens of times before, but something feels different today. A heaviness in the air that I can't quite explain. Perfect hiking weather. I mutter to myself, trying to shake off the unusual sense of unease. The temperature gauge shows 48 degrees Fahrenheit, crisp enough to keep the bugs away, but warm enough for comfortable hiking once I get moving. The parking lot is deserted except for a single ranger's truck. Its emptiness shouldn't surprise me. It's early on a Wednesday in October, well past the peak tourist season. Still, the silence feels almost oppressive as I kill the engine. I double-check my backpack's contents. 3 liters of water, trail mix, protein bars, first aid kit, flashlight, and the new can of bear spray I bought last month. I've never needed it before, but the rangers have been posting more bear warnings lately. Better safe than sorry, I say aloud, my voice sounding oddly hollow in the empty car. The door's creak echoes across the parking lot as I step out. The crisp autumn air hits my face like a gentle slap, carrying the sweet sour scent of decomposing leaves and damp earth. I adjust my fleece jacket, already knowing I'll shed it within the first mile. As I shoulder my backpack, a gust of wind sends yellow leaves swirling around my feet. The trees at the trailhead sway, their branches casting shifting shadows on the ground. The morning fog weaves between their trunks like ghostly fingers, creating and dissolving shapes that my mind struggles not to interpret. The trail register station stands at the head of the path, its wooden roof dark with morning dew. I flip through the soggy pages, noting the last entry was from 2 days ago. A group of 4 who'd planned to camp at Lewis Mountain. October 15th. I write, my pen barely marking the damp paper. John Fields, solo day hike, Appalachian Trail section, expected return 5 p.m. My phone buzzes, probably Sarah checking if I made it to the trailhead. I pull it out to respond, noting the weak signal. 1 bar. Within an hour, I'll lose service completely. At the trailhead, beautiful morning for a hike. I text back. Her response comes quickly. Be safe. Don't forget there was a bear sighting last week. Got my spray. Will stay alert. I reply, then add, love you. I wait a moment, watching the message status change to delivered before slipping the phone into my jacket's zippered pocket. The trail beckons, a narrow path disappearing into the misty forest. My boots crunch against the gravel as I start walking, each step settling into the familiar rhythm that will carry me through the next several hours. The ground is damp from overnight rain, releasing that distinctive petrichor scent that makes autumn hiking so intoxicating. About 50 yards in, something dark catches my eye. I pause, squinting through the morning haze. Just off the trail, a fresh pile of bear scat sits steaming slightly in the cool air. My heart rate kicks up a notch as I examine it from a safe distance. Dark, filled with partially digested berries and what looks like fur. Definitely black bear droppings and recent. It's fine, I whisper to myself, unconsciously touching the bear spray canister on my belt. They're more scared of you than you are of them. The words sound hollow, a weak attempt at self-reassurance. I've encountered black bears before, usually just glimpses of them shuffling away through the undergrowth. They're generally shy creatures, more likely to avoid humans than confront them. Still, something about seeing such fresh evidence of their presence sets my nerves on edge. I continue walking, my senses heightened. Every sound seems amplified, the crunch of leaves under my boots, the rustle of branches in the breeze, the occasional call of a crow. The fog creates an acoustic chamber, making it difficult to judge the distance and direction of sounds. A sharp crack echoes through the trees, a breaking branch. I freeze mid-step, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray. For several long seconds, I stand perfectly still, listening intently. The forest holds its breath with me. Finally, a white-tailed deer emerges from the mist about 30 yards ahead. It pauses, regarding me with liquid eyes, then bounds away into the undergrowth. I release a shaky laugh, already feeling foolish about my paranoia. Get it together, John. I scold myself, resuming my pace. You've hiked this trail 100 times. But as I press deeper into the misty forest, I can't shake the feeling that something's different today. The familiar trail seems somehow altered, as if the fog has reshaped it into something foreign and untamed. The shadows between the trees feel deeper, the silence more complete. I check my watch, 7:15 a.m. The sun should be burning off the fog soon, bringing with it the warmth and clarity of a typical autumn day. Until then, I'll have to navigate through this ghostly landscape, trying to ignore the growing sense that something is watching me from just beyond the veil of mist. A crow calls overhead, the sound sharp and warning. I adjust my pack straps and press on, unaware that in less than 2 hours, this familiar trail will become the setting for a nightmare I'll never forget. 3 miles in, the morning fog has begun to lift, revealing the vibrant autumn canopy above. The trail winds through a section of older growth forest, where massive oaks and hickories tower overhead. I'm making good time, having settled into a comfortable rhythm, when something unusual catches my eye. A large oak tree beside the trail bears deep gouges in its bark. I slow my pace, drawn closer by the distinctive marking pattern. The exposed wood glistens with fresh sap, amber droplets slowly oozing down the trunk. Those weren't here last week, I murmur, measuring the marks against my hand from a safe distance. The parallel grooves are wider than my spread fingers, and much deeper than the old territorial scratches I usually see on trees along this trail. A cool breeze rustles through the canopy, carrying with it the sweet sour scent of rotting leaves. But there's something else in the air, something that makes the back of my neck prickle. I inhale deeply, trying to identify it, a musky, wild odor that seems to cling to the moisture in the air. Reaching for my water bottle, I notice the unusual silence. The constant background chorus of chickadees and nuthatches has ceased. Even the squirrels, typically abundant in this section of forest, are nowhere to be seen or heard. The woods hold their breath around me, as if waiting for something. Hello, I call out, more to break the oppressive quiet than expecting a response. My voice sounds thin and vulnerable in the still air. The silence that follows is absolute. Moving forward with heightened awareness, I spot more fresh claw marks on surrounding trees. They form a distinct pattern all at about the same height, all recently made. I've hiked enough to know that black bears often mark their territory, but the frequency and freshness of these marks suggest unusually active behavior. A movement in my peripheral vision makes me turn sharply, but whatever it was has already disappeared into the understory. The forest seems to close in around me, the trail suddenly feeling narrower than I remember. Keep it together, I whisper to myself, unconsciously picking up my pace. You're still on a marked trail, still in a national park. Rounding a bend, I stop dead in my tracks. Just off the trail lies the partially consumed carcass of a white-tailed deer. The ground around it is torn up, leaves and soil displaced by powerful paws. The kill is fresh, probably from last night or early this morning. My hands shake as I reach for the bear spray on my belt. The canister provides little comfort as I study the scene before me. The deer's ribcage has been torn open with incredible force, its internal organs partially consumed. Around the carcass, the ground is marked with massive paw prints pressed deep into the soft earth. I pull out my phone to document the scene, but the no service indicator mocks my attempt at connection. Swallowing hard, I take a few careful steps backward, remembering everything I've read about bear behavior. They often return to their kills, and I have no desire to be here when that happens. The sound of my own breathing seems thunderous in the unnatural quiet. I scan the surrounding forest, looking for movement, for any sign that I'm not alone. The trees have taken on a menacing aspect, their trunks creating countless shadowy spaces where something large could easily hide. Think, I tell myself, forcing my racing thoughts into order. What did the ranger's guide say about bear encounters? I mentally review the safety procedures. Make noise, travel in groups, carry bear spray, maintain awareness. Well, I have the spray, but I'm alone, and something tells me that making noise right now might not be the best idea. The trail narrows ahead, squeezing between two rocky outcrops. It's a section I've passed through countless times, but today it looks like the mouth of some great beast. As I approach, a gust of wind rushes through the gap, carrying with it that same musky odor, stronger now. My rational mind says to turn back. I'm only 3 miles and I could be back at my car in an hour. But pride and stubbornness push me forward. I've hiked this trail in all seasons, in all weather. One active bear shouldn't drive me away. Unzipping my jacket pocket, I pull out my emergency whistle, letting it hang ready around my neck. The bear spray feels too secure in its holster, so I remove it, holding it ready in my right hand as I approach the narrow passage. Each step forward feels like a decision I might regret. The rocky walls rise on either side, creating an echo chamber that plays tricks with my hearing. Was that a shuffle of movement ahead, or just the wind? Is that heavy breathing, or just my own ragged breath bouncing off the stone? Time seems to slow as I make my way through the passage. Every sense is heightened, the rough texture of the bear spray canister in my sweaty palm, the sound of loose gravel shifting under my boots, the increasingly strong wild scent that makes my primitive brain scream danger. I'm halfway through when a distinct huffing sound freezes me in place. It comes from somewhere ahead, just around the bend where the trail emerges from between the rocks. The sound is unlike anything I've heard before, not quite a growl, not quite a breath, but something primal that speaks directly to the part of my brain that knows what it means to be prey. The morning sun, now fully risen, casts long shadows through the gap ahead. In those shadows, something moves, something large. The world narrows to a single moment as I round the bend. 20 feet ahead, a massive black bear stands in the middle of the trail, its shoulder height easily reaching my chest. Time seems to crystallize, each detail burning itself into my memory with terrible clarity. The bear is bigger than any I've seen before, its black fur glossy in the filtered sunlight. My mind frantically catalogs details even as my body freezes. The dish-shaped face, the prominent shoulder hump, the massive head that swivels to focus entirely on me. This is no juvenile, No scared youngster that might bolt at the sight of a human. This is an adult black bear in its prime, likely weighing over 300 pounds. Our eyes lock. In that moment, every documentary I've watched, every ranger's lecture I've heard, every article I've read about bears being afraid of humans evaporates. The intelligence in those dark eyes holds nothing of the cartoonish friendliness I'd foolishly associated with bears. These are the eyes of a predator, calculating and cold. Stay calm. I whisper to myself, the words barely audible over my thundering heartbeat. Remember the protocol. My fingers fumble with the bear spray's safety clip, a task I'd practiced dozens of times, but never under the gaze of an actual bear. The plastic feels slick in my sweating hands. Hey bear. I try to call out firmly, but my voice emerges as a pathetic croak. I clear my throat and try again, louder this time. Hey bear. I'm just passing through. The bear drops to all fours, its movements fluid and purposeful. My legs turn to water as I truly comprehend its size. Stretched out, it must be over 6 feet long. Muscles ripple beneath its fur as it takes a deliberate step forward. No, stay back. I raise my arms to appear larger, remembering the ranger's instructions through a haze of terror. I don't want any trouble. A deep huffing sound emanates from the bear, like air being forced through a massive bellows. The noise seems to vibrate through my chest cavity. I know this sound. It's a warning, a sign of agitation. This is the moment where the bear is supposed to turn and run away, to prove all the statistics about black bears avoiding human contact. But it doesn't run. Instead, it takes another step forward, massive paws crushing the fallen leaves. Its head swings from side to side, sizing me up. I can see its nostrils flaring, sampling my scent on the breeze. My hands shake as I aim the bear spray, trying to remember the effective range. 15 feet? 20? The bear is still at the outer limit, but closing the distance with each passing second. Back off! I shout, trying to channel authority into my voice even as it cracks with fear. Go away! The bear's only response is another huff, deeper this time. A string of drool hangs from its jaw, catching the morning light like crystal. Its ears are forward, not flattened in fear or aggression, but focused intently on me. Every aspect of its body language screams predatory interest. I take a careful step backward, then another. My heel catches on a root and I stumble slightly. The movement triggers something in the bear. Its ears flatten against its skull, and its lips curl back to reveal yellowed teeth the length of my fingers. Oh God! I breathe, my thumb finally finding the safety clip on the bear spray. The click it makes seems absurdly loud in the tension-filled air. Time slows to a crawl. I watch the bear's muscles bunch beneath its fur, see its massive head lower slightly, recognize the pre-charge posture from countless wildlife documentaries that suddenly seem incredibly inadequate preparation for this moment. No, no, no. The words tumble from my mouth in a breathless mantra. The bear's warning huff transforms into a deep, guttural sound that seems to bypass my ears and vibrate directly through my bones. This isn't the bluff charge I've read about, where the bear stops short to test your resolve. There's nothing uncertain in its posture, nothing hesitant in its intent. My voice finally breaks free, but the scream that tears from my throat sounds distant and foreign, as if it belongs to someone else. The bear spray feels impossibly small in my hands as I point it at the approaching monster. In that final moment before everything explodes into chaos, a strangely calm thought floats through my mind. So this is how it happens. Time has contracted to this single instant me, alone on a trail I've hiked 100 times, facing a creature that has emerged straight from humanity's oldest nightmares. The bear's muscles uncoil like a released spring. Everything I know about bear encounters, every piece of advice I've ever read or heard, collides in my mind. Make yourself big. Don't run. Fight back against black bears. Play dead for grizzlies. Use your bear spray. But knowledge fractures under the weight of primal terror as 300 pounds of muscle and fury launches itself toward me with impossible speed. The distance between us vanishes in a heartbeat. The bear closes the distance with explosive speed, moving faster than anything its size has any right to move. My finger finds the trigger of the bear spray, but I'm too slow, devastatingly, horrifyingly too slow. The world becomes a blur of black fur and thundering power. The impact feels like being hit by a truck. One moment I'm standing, the next I'm airborne. Time fragments into brutal snapshots. The sky wheeling overhead, the ground rushing up, the overwhelming sensation of raw power as 300 pounds of predator connects with my body. No! My scream cuts off as I slam into the ground, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Sharp rocks dig into my back through my jacket. The bear spray flies from my grasp, clattering away into the underbrush. White-hot agony explodes across my left arm as the bear's claws tear through my jacket like tissue paper. I feel the fabric give way, feel the moment when there's nothing left between those razors and my flesh. The pain is beyond anything I've experienced. A searing, electric feeling of meat and muscle being parted. Help! The word tears from my throat, although I know there's no one within miles to hear it. Somebody help! My head cracks against something hard, a rock or root, sending stars exploding across my vision. Through the kaleidoscope of pain and terror, I smell the bear's breath, hot and rank with the scent of decay. Its face fills my field of vision, black lips pulled back from yellowed teeth, strings of saliva dripping onto my chest. Time slows to a crawl. I can see every detail of the creature above me, the individual hairs of its fur, the scratches on its nose, the way its pupils contract in the sunlight. This close, the bear's eyes aren't black at all, but a deep brown that holds an intelligence that seems almost contemplative as it considers how to end me. My right hand scrabbles desperately in the leaves beside me, searching for anything, a rock, a stick, the lost bear spray. My fingers brush something cylindrical that rolls at my touch. The bear spray, it must have landed closer than I thought. The bear's head dips toward my throat. I can feel its hot breath on my neck, hear the wet sound of its breathing. This is it, I think. This is how I die. My fingers close around the bear spray canister. Through a haze of pain and terror, I remember the training video's instructions. Aim slightly down and spray in a zigzag pattern. The bear's weight shifts, its massive paw pressing down on my chest. The claws pierce my jacket, pricking the skin beneath. I can feel my ribs creaking under the pressure. My left arm throbs in time with my racing heart, hot blood soaking my sleeve. With every ounce of strength left in me, I bring up the bear spray. My thumb finds the safety clip through muscle memory. Thank God for all those practice drills. The bear's head is less than 2 feet from my face when I squeeze the trigger. The spray erupts in a cloud of orange mist, catching the bear full in the face. Time restarts with explosive force. The bear's reaction is immediate and violent. It rears back with a roar that shakes leaves from the trees, massive head whipping from side to side. The pressure on my chest vanishes as it staggers backward, pawing frantically at its face. My own scream mingles with the bear's roars as I scramble backward, my feet pushing against the ground, left arm hanging useless at my side. The spray cloud hangs in the air between us, burning my eyes and throat despite being on the periphery. I can't imagine what it feels like to take a direct hit. The bear thunders around in a circle, snorting and coughing, crushing undergrowth beneath its massive paws. Each movement sends waves of displaced air carrying the pepper spray toward me. My eyes water and my lungs burn, but survival instinct keeps me moving away from the enraged predator. Get away! I scream, my voice raw and unrecognizable. Get back! My back hits a tree trunk. Using it for support, I pull myself to my feet. The world spins sickeningly, possible concussion from hitting my head. The rational part of my brain supplies. Blood drips steadily from my left arm, forming a dark pattern on the leaves at my feet. The bear continues its frenzied dance, rubbing its face against the ground, then against a tree trunk, desperately trying to rid itself of the burning sensation. Its original predatory focus has shattered into pure animal panic. Through tears and terror, I see my opportunity. The bear is distracted, temporarily blinded by the spray. Every survival instinct screams at me to run, but I know that's a death sentence. You never run from a predator. Instead, I begin edging sideways, keeping my back to the trees, trying to put distance between myself and the chaos. My left arm hangs like a dead weight, sending sharp bolts of pain through my shoulder with each movement. I can feel blood running down to my fingertips, leaving a trail that I pray the bear won't be able to follow through its pepper spray-induced haze. Please, I whisper, though I'm not sure to whom or what I'm pleading. Please, please, please. The bear's roars have diminished to huffs and coughs, but they still echo through the trees like thunder. I continue my careful retreat, one step at a time, never taking my eyes off the massive black shape that's still thrashing in the orange mist. 20 feet, 30. Each step takes me further from death, but the forest seems to stretch endlessly behind me, filled with shadows that might hide more dangers. My vision blurs, blood loss or fear or both, but I force myself to stay upright. Stopping means dying, and I'm not ready to die on this trail. Not today. Blood soaks through my shredded sleeve, turning the blue fabric a dark, glistening purple. Each heartbeat sends a fresh pulse of warmth down my arm. I need to stop the bleeding, but not here, not with the bear's confused roars still echoing through the trees behind me. Keep moving, I gasp between ragged breaths. Just keep moving. My feet stumble over roots and rocks as I half walk, half run down the trail. The morning's careful observations now become terrifying landmarks. There's the tree with the fresh claw marks. Here's the scattered deer carcass. Each one marks my desperate path back to safety. Branches whip at my face as I veer off the trail to avoid the kill site. The last thing I need is another bear attracted by the scent of blood and meat. My vision swims, dark spots dancing at the edges. The concussion and blood loss are taking their toll. Focus! I command myself, hearing the weakness in my voice. 3 miles. Just 3 miles to the car. A wave of dizziness forces me to grab a tree trunk for support. The rough bark beneath my palm feels hyper-real, every ridge and groove etched into my awareness. I look down at my left arm, immediately wishing I hadn't, for parallel gashes run from shoulder to elbow, deep enough to show glimpses of something pale that my mind refuses to identify as my own tissue. Oh God! I choke, bile rising in my throat. The forest spins around me, and I force myself to look away from the wounds. My phone. I need to call for help. With trembling fingers, I pull it from my jacket pocket. The screen is cracked from the impact, but it still lights up. No signal. Of course, there's no signal. There never is on this section of trail. A branch snaps somewhere behind me. Pure adrenaline surges through my system, temporarily washing away the pain and dizziness. I don't look back. I don't need to see if it's the bear or just my paranoid imagination. My legs start moving again, carrying me forward with desperate energy. Help! I try to shout, but it comes out as more of a wheeze. Somebody help! My lungs burn with each breath, the lingering effects of the bear spray making every inhalation feel like swallowing fire. The morning's crisp autumn air has become a torment, each cold breath sending daggers through my chest. The trail seems alien now, twisted by fear and pain into something unrecognizable. Did I pass that fallen log before? Is this even the right direction? Panic threatens to overwhelm me as I realize I'm not entirely sure I'm heading toward the parking lot. My boots slip on wet leaves, sending me sprawling. The impact jars my injured arm, and a scream tears from my throat before I can stop it. The sound echoes through the trees, and I clamp my mouth shut, terrified of drawing attention. Get up! I whisper fiercely. Get up, get up, get up! Using my good arm, I push myself to my knees, then to my feet. My hiking pants are torn at the knee, fresh blood mixing with the dirt and leaves. Minor injury. Irrelevant. Keep moving. A crow calls overhead, the sound nearly stopping my heart before I recognize it. Everything is a threat now. Every shadow might hide a predator. Every sound might be pursuit. The forest I've loved for years has become a gauntlet of terror. I recognize a distinctive bend in the trail, the same spot where I'd stopped to photograph wildflowers last week. The parking lot is less than a mile away. Hope surges through me, lending strength to my shaking legs. Almost there, I gasp. Almost there, almost there, almost there. The mantra keeps time with my footsteps as I push forward. The morning sun has burned away most of the fog now, but my vision is developing its own kind of mist, gray edges that threaten to close in. Blood loss. I'm losing too much blood. My breath comes in sobbing gasps. The trail seems to stretch endlessly ahead, each turn revealing only more winding path. But I've hiked this trail enough times to know I'm getting close. The vegetation is changing, becoming the younger growth that marks the edge of the forest. A sound behind me, something large moving through the undergrowth. Real or imagined, it doesn't matter. Terror gives me one final burst of energy. I break into a stumbling run, no longer caring about the noise I'm making. Through the trees, a glint of metal catches my eye. My car, the parking lot, civilization. Please, I sob, fumbling in my pocket for my keys with my good hand. Please, please, please. My fingers close around the key fob. Another sound behind me, closer now. I don't look back. The parking lot opens up before me, my Subaru sitting exactly where I left it, though that moment seems like it happened in another lifetime. The key fob chirps, the sound absurdly normal in this nightmare. I throw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. My shaking hand finds the ignition button, and the engine roars to life. Only then do I dare to look in the rearview mirror. The trail entrance stands empty, the morning sun casting deep shadows between the trees. Nothing moves except the gentle sway of branches in the breeze. My left arm throbs in time with my racing heart, blood dripping onto the clean upholstery of my car seat. The forest I've hiked countless times before looms in my mirrors, familiar and yet forever changed. Somewhere in there, a monster roams, as real as any from humanity's darkest stories. But I'm alive. Somehow, against all odds, I'm alive. With trembling fingers, I put the car in reverse. I need a hospital, need help, need to get as far from this place as I can. But even as I pull away, I know part of me will never leave this forest. Part of me will always be running down that trail, heart pounding, blood flowing, prey to something ancient and terrible that walks on four legs and knows no mercy. The emergency room lights bore into my skull with merciless intensity. Everything seems too bright, too sharp, too loud, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the steady beep of monitors, the murmur of voices just outside my curtained cubicle. Mr. Fields. The doctor's voice cuts through my daze. She's young, maybe early 30s, with steady hands that probe the edges of my wounds. Can you tell me again exactly what happened? Black Bear, I manage, wincing as she peels away the temporary bandages the paramedic supplied. On the Appalachian Trail section, near Thornton Gap. These are definitely consistent with ursine claws, she confirms, measuring the gashes with careful fingers. You're lucky, they're deep, but they missed major arteries. You said you used bear spray? I nod, then immediately regret the movement as my head throbs. Got it right in the face. That's the only reason My voice trails off as the reality of how close it was hits me again. You did exactly the right thing, she says, reaching for a tray of implements. We're going to need to clean these wounds thoroughly and then start suturing. I'm concerned about infection. Bear claws carry a lot of bacteria. We'll start you on preventive antibiotics right away. A park ranger enters the cubicle, notebook in hand. He's older, with weathered features and eyes that have seen this before. Mr. Fields? I'm Ranger Mike Sullivan. Think you're up to giving me a statement while the doc works? Yeah, I say, then hiss as the doctor begins irrigating the wounds. The saline solution burns, carrying away dried blood and forest debris. Take your time, Sullivan says, pulling up a stool. Start from the beginning. I recount the morning's events, my voice shaking at times. The fresh claw marks on the trees, the deer carcass, the terrible moment of recognition as I rounded that bend. With each detail, the ranger nods, making notes. Sounds like a mature male, probably around 300 pounds from your description, he says. We've had reports of increased activity in that area. You said it charged without a bluff. Straight at me, No hesitation. The memory makes me shudder, and the doctor pauses in her work. Mr. Fields, I need you to try to stay still, she says gently. These lacerations need precise suturing. Sorry, I mumble, forcing myself to relax back onto the exam table. The local anesthetic has numbed most of the pain, but I can still feel the pull and tug as she works. A commotion outside the curtain draws our attention. Sir, you can't go in there yet, a nurse's voice protests. I'm with Channel 7 News, a male voice responds. The public has a right to know about dangerous wildlife in our parks. Get them out of here, the doctor snaps to someone outside. To me, she adds, local news always monitors the emergency frequencies. Bear attacks make good headlines. Ranger Sullivan steps outside briefly, and I hear him firmly but politely dispersing the reporter. When he returns, his face is apologetic. They'll probably camp out in the waiting room. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. How many stitches? I ask the doctor, trying to distract myself from both the suturing and the thought of reporters waiting to sensationalize my story. We're looking at over 60 when all is said and done, she replies, focused on her work. The lacerations are deep but clean. Bears keep their claws sharp. You'll have scarring, but with proper care, it should heal well. My phone buzzes continuously on the side table. Messages from family and friends who've somehow already heard. News travels fast in small towns. I can't deal with them yet. Can't find the words to describe what happened. Will you be closing the trail? I ask the ranger. Sullivan shakes his head. We'll post warnings and set up cameras. But unless we can confirm this bear is consistently aggressive toward humans, closure isn't warranted. Black bears are typically shy. This one wasn't shy, I interrupt, more sharply than I intended. This one was hunting. A long moment of silence follows, broken only by the quiet sounds of the doctor's work and the steady beep of monitors. I believe you, Sullivan finally says, and your report will be filed with all the details. But the public has certain expectations about black bears. They're not like grizzlies. People think they're safer, more predictable. One confirmed predatory attack could cause panic, affect tourism. So what? It never happened? The words come out bitter, angry. It happened, he assures me. It'll be in the report. We'll increase patrols, post more warnings. But unless there's another incident, he doesn't need to finish. I understand. My encounter will become another statistic, a brief mention in the local paper, fodder for a few days of sensational news stories before being forgotten. The doctor finishes the last suture and begins bandaging my arm. You'll need to keep these wounds clean and dry. Follow up with your primary care physician in 3 days. We'll give you prescriptions for antibiotics and pain management. I nod numbly, watching her wrap white gauze around my arm, covering the neat rows of black stitches. Already the morning feels dreamlike, surreal. If it weren't for the physical evidence, I might doubt it happened at all. One more thing, Sullivan says, flipping through his notes. Can you mark the exact location of the encounter on this trail map? We'll need it for the report. My hand shakes as I take the map, memories flooding back as I trace the trail with my finger. There, that bend, that rocky passage. The place where my understanding of the world shifted forever. The place where I learned that sometimes monsters are real, and they walk on 4 legs through our civilized woods, carrying ancient hunger in their dark eyes. Morning fog clings to Shenandoah's slopes as I guide 2 rangers truck down the familiar road to Thornton Gap. My bandaged arm throbs with each bump and turn, a persistent reminder of yesterday's nightmare. The passenger seat feels strange. This is the first time in years I haven't driven myself to the trailhead. We appreciate you coming back out, Mr. Fields, Ranger Sullivan says from behind the wheel. I know this isn't easy. The second ranger, Martinez, younger and carrying a tranquilizer rifle, watches the tree lean as we park. Weather's not helping, she comments, nodding at the thick fog. Rain last night probably washed away most tracks. My throat tightens as I step out of the truck. The parking lot looks exactly the same. The wooden trail register, the faded warning signs, my own tire tracks still visible in the gravel. Only now everything feels different, charged with menace. "Take your time," Sullivan says quietly, noting my hesitation. "We can wait until the fog lifts." I shake my head. "No, let's do this." We start up the trail, Martinez leading with the rifle, Sullivan beside me, moving at my pace. Each step sends jolts of pain through my injured arm despite the prescription painkillers. The morning dew has made everything slick, and the sweet rot smell of wet leaves fills the air. "There," I say, pointing with my good arm. "That's where I first saw the bear scat." Sullivan kneels to examine the spot, but rain has reduced any evidence to a dark smear on the leaves. He makes a note in his waterproof notebook anyway, marking the location on his GPS. We continue walking. The forest seems to press in around us, despite the daylight and my armed companions. Every rustle in the undergrowth makes my heart race. Martinez maintains a steady scan of our surroundings, her movements professional, practiced. The claw marks were here. I indicate a large oak. The gouges are still visible, but the rain has washed away the fresh sap. And there, I point out the pattern of territorial markings. Definitely recent, Sullivan confirms, photographing each tree. Good height for a mature male. The deer carcass site comes next. Little remains besides scattered bones and a depression in the wet leaves. Martinez examines the area carefully while Sullivan takes more photos. "Consistent with bear feeding behavior," Martinez notes, "but we can't definitively link it to your encounter." My voice comes out sharper than intended. "You mean aside from it being exactly where I said it would be?" "We believe you, Mr. Fields," Sullivan interjects calmly. "We just need to document everything according to protocol." We press on. Each step brings us closer to the attack site, and my feet grow heavier. The rocky passage appears through the fog like the mouth of a cave. I stop dead, my heart hammering. "That's where." My voice fails. "Just around that bend." Martinez moves ahead, rifle ready, while Sullivan stays with me. "We don't have to go further if you don't want to." I force myself forward. I need to see it, need to prove to myself it was real. The fog parts as we round the bend, revealing the scene of my nightmare. Signs of the encounter remain, despite the rain. My shredded jacket fragments still hang from branches, stained dark with my blood. Deep gouges mark the ground where the bear's claws tore up the earth. Sullivan photographs everything methodically while Martinez keeps watch. "Here's where I fell," I say, my voice distant in my own ears. "The bear spray canister." I scan the underbrush, but the empty can is gone, probably carried off by the rain-swollen stream nearby. Sullivan sets up a trail camera on a nearby tree while Martinez takes measurements of the claw marks in the soil. Their routine feels surreal, reducing my brush with death to a series of data points and photographs. "We'll post warning signs," Sullivan explains as he works. "Monitor the area for increased bear activity. If we can identify an unusually aggressive individual." "But you won't close the trail," I finish for him. "It's not a question." He sighs, securing the camera. "Without ongoing incidents or concrete evidence of a clear threat." "What would be concrete enough?" I gesture at my arm. "This isn't evidence." Martinez rejoins us, her expression sympathetic but professional. "Bears are territorial, Mr. Fields. Without proof, this was predatory behavior rather than a defensive response." I laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet forest. "Defensive? It stalked me. It had every chance to run away." "We understand," Sullivan says gently, "but management decisions require protocol, right?" The word tastes bitter. A branch snaps somewhere in the fog-shrouded forest. All three of us freeze, Martinez's rifle coming up smoothly to her shoulder. After a long moment, a white-tailed deer emerges briefly from the mist before disappearing again. The tension breaks, but I notice both rangers scanning the trees with increased intensity. They feel it too, the watchful presence of the forest, the sense that something moves just beyond our vision. "We should head back," Sullivan suggests. "We've got what we need." The return hike passes in silence. Each landmark feels like a taunt. The scattered bones, the marked trees, the washed-out bear scat. My memory overlays yesterday's terror on today's documentation, creating a palimpsest of nightmare and reality. Back at the parking lot, Sullivan hands me a copy of the incident report to sign. The clinical language reduces my ordeal to sterile facts. Encounter with Ursus americanus. Defensive response. Subject sustained lacerations. I sign it anyway. What else can I do? The fog is lifting now, revealing the familiar slopes of Shenandoah. Somewhere up there, a monster roams free, while down here we file papers and post signs and pretend we can manage the wild with protocols and procedures. The ranger's warnings will fade with the next rain. The trail camera will capture deer and raccoons and maybe, if they're lucky, a glimpse of black fur in the night. Life will go on, hikers will come and go, and my attack will become another footnote in the park's records. But I know the truth that lurks behind the bureaucratic language and warning signs. I have the scars to prove it. Night brings no peace. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind through the trees outside my window, jolts me awake. My bedroom, once a sanctuary, has become a theater where my me, ND, replays the attack in endless variations. Sometimes I escape, sometimes I don't. Just try to rest, Sarah had said before leaving, concern etching lines around her eyes. Call me if you need anything, anytime. But how do I explain that closing my eyes means seeing those teeth again? That every shadow holds the memory of that massive shape emerging from the fog? The digital clock reads 3:17 a.m. when another nightmare snaps me awake. My heart pounding against my ribs. My left arm throbs beneath the bandages, the stitches pulling with each involuntary twitch. The pain medication sits untouched on my nightstand. I can't bear the thought of dulling my senses, of being anything less than fully alert. You're safe, I whisper to the darkness. You're home. You're safe. The words ring hollow in my empty bedroom. Home doesn't feel safe anymore. Not with the forest pressing close outside my windows. Not with the memory of wild eyes and slashing claws still fresh in my mind. Morning brings no relief, just a bone-deep exhaustion that makes every movement feel like wading through molasses. The bathroom mirror reveals dark circles under my eyes, a pallor to my skin that speaks of nights spent staring at shadows. The stitches itch unbearably as my wounds heal, a constant reminder that won't let me forget. During my shower, I catch glimpses of the angry red lines running down my arm, each one perfectly parallel, each one a signature of the beast that marked me. My phone buzzes, another message from my hiking group asking when I'll join them again. I leave it unanswered, like all the others. My hiking boots sit untouched by the door, gathering dust, the mere sight of them enough to make my palms sweat and my heart race. The local paper arrives with my story, reduced to a small column on page 6. Increased bear activity reported in Shenandoah. My attack merits one paragraph, sanitized into clinical language that bears no resemblance to the reality of teeth and claws and terror. Local hiker John Fields, 34, reported an encounter with a black bear on the Appalachian Trail section near Thornton Gap. Fields sustained non-life-threatening injuries. Park officials remind visitors to exercise caution and follow bear safety guidelines. I crumple the paper and throw it away. Non-life-threatening, as if having your arm torn open while staring death in the face is a minor inconvenience. The days blur together. I return to work, where colleagues try to be sympathetic but clearly don't understand. They gather around my desk, eager for what they think will be an exciting story. Did you punch it in the nose? Mark from accounting asks, grinning. I heard that's what you're supposed to do. Must have been quite an adventure. Janet adds, eyes bright with morbid curiosity. I mumble something non-committal and turn back to my computer screen. How can I explain that it wasn't an adventure? That there's nothing exciting about feeling your flesh tear? About knowing you're seconds away from having your throat ripped out? During my lunch break, I catch them staring at my arm when they think I'm not looking. The bandages are gone now, replaced by an angry constellation of healing scars. Some people ask to see them, as if my wounds are some kind of badge of honor, a cool story to share at parties. You were so lucky, they say, not understanding that luck has nothing to do with it. Luck didn't save me. Bear spray and blind panic and perhaps something deeper, some primitive survival instinct buried in our DNA. That's what kept me alive. Nights remain the worst. I've taken to leaving lights on, unable to bear the darkness that transforms every shadow into a hulking shape, every noise into the sound of heavy breathing. The forest behind my house, once a source of peace, now feels like a threat lurking just beyond my walls. Sarah tries to help, staying over some nights, but I can tell my jumpiness, my constant checking of locks and windows, wears on her. Have you thought about talking to someone? She suggests gently one evening. There are specialists who deal with trauma. I'm fine, I insist, even as I startle at the sound of a raccoon knocking over the garbage can outside. I just need time. But time seems to move differently now, measured in the slow healing of wounds and the gradual fading of bruises. The physical pain diminishes, but something else takes its place, or a hyper-awareness, a constant tension in my muscles, ready to flee at any moment. The stitches come out eventually, leaving behind raised pink lines that the doctor assures me will fade to silver over time. But some marks go deeper than skin. Some wounds don't show on the surface. My hiking gear gathers dust in the garage, the bear spray canister I replaced sitting and used in its holster. Friends have stopped asking when I'll join them on the trails. They've seen the way I flinch at unexpected movements, the way my eyes constantly scan for threats even in the safety of my own backyard. It'll get better, they say, but their words fade to background noise, meaningless as the rustle of leaves in the wind, because they don't understand. They haven't felt the weight of ancient predatory intelligence in a bear's gaze. They haven't learned, in the most visceral way possible, that we're not as removed from the food chain as we like to think. The scars on my arm will fade with time, becoming just another story written on my skin. But the real wound is deeper, the knowledge that something wild and hungry walks in our civilized woods, carrying the memory of our flesh, waiting for the next time our paths cross in the fog-shrouded forest. Spring arrives with an explosion of wildflowers and birdsong, painting Shenandoah in colors that seem almost obscene in their brightness. 6 months have passed since the attack, and the mountains are calling again. Their siren song impossible to ignore despite the fear that still lives in my bones. You don't have to do this, Sarah says, standing beside me in the Thornton Gap parking lot. No one would blame you if you never came back here. My hands tremble slightly as I check my backpack for the third time. 2 cans of bear spray now, one on each hip. A whistle around my neck. Everything written in the safety guides. Everything the rangers recommend. I do have to, I reply, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I can't let it own me forever. The parking lot is fuller than that October morning. A spring Saturday brings out the hikers in droves. Families with children, groups of college students, serious backpackers with heavy packs. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of what lurks in these woods. I'll be right beside you, Sarah promises, adjusting her own pack. She's taken a wilderness first aid course since my attack, carries a satellite phone now. Small comforts against big fears. My heart races as we approach the trail register. The old logbook is gone, replaced with a fresh one for the new season. I sign our names with deliberate strokes, refusing to let my hand shake. John and Sarah Fields, day hike, expected return 2 p.m. The first steps onto the trail feel like walking into the mouth of a beast. Every sense is heightened, the crunch of gravel under my boots, the whisper of wind through new leaves, the play of shadows across the path. My fingers keep brushing the bear spray canisters, an unconscious tick I can't control. Look, Sarah points to a cluster of spring beauties blooming beside the trail. They're everywhere this year. I try to focus on the flowers, on the normalcy of a spring hike with someone I love. But my eyes keep scanning the trees, looking for signs I never noticed before that October morning. Now I see everything: scratch marks on trees, disturbed earth, broken branches. There's so much life here, Sarah says softly, understanding my need to rewrite these memories with better ones. A group of hikers passes us heading down, their cheerful greetings jarring against my internal tension. One of them carries a walking stick with bells attached, bear bells, I realize. Once I would have thought them overly cautious. Now I know better. Each landmark from that day hits like a physical blow. Here's where I first saw the bear scat. There's the oak tree with the claw marks, now weathered by winter but still visible. My pace slows as we approach the site of the deer carcass, but nature has erased all signs of that violence. Wildflowers grow where blood once soaked the ground. We can turn back, Sarah offers, noting my hesitation. I shake my head. Just a little further. The rocky passage looms ahead, no longer foggy but still threatening. New warning signs have been posted, bear activity reported in this area. Their yellow backgrounds bright against the gray stone. The park's response to my attack, bureaucratic and insufficient. Sarah squeezes my hand as we enter the narrow trail between the rocks. My breath comes faster, memories flooding back with each step. The sound of my boots on stone sounds exactly the same as it did that day. I can hear your heart pounding, Sarah whispers. Right here, I say, stopping at the bend. This is where. I can't finish the sentence, but I don't need to. Sarah knows the story, has read the ranger's report, has seen my scars. She stands quietly beside me, letting me face this moment in my own time. A squirrel chatters overhead, making me jump. Sarah's hand finds mine again, anchoring me to the present. This is not that day. The sun is shining, the trail is busy with hikers, and I am not alone. Maybe that's enough for today, she suggests gently. Part of me wants to agree to retreat to the safety of the parking lot. But another part, a stronger part, needs to see this through. I take a deep breath and round the bend. The attack site has changed. Spring growth covers the ground where I fell. New saplings push up through the soil that was torn by massive claws. Nature has erased the violence, reclaimed the space for life rather than terror. A crow calls from a nearby branch, watching us with obsidian eyes. 6 months ago, that sound would have sent me running. Today, it's just a crow doing what crows do. I made it. I breathe, surprised by the relief that floods through me. I actually made it back here. Sarah wraps her arm around my waist, careful of the scars she knows by heart now. You did, and we can come back again or never come back. Whatever you need. A group of hikers appears around the far bend, their voices carrying on the spring air. Normal people on a normal day, passing through this spot without knowing its significance. To them, it's just another beautiful section of trail. Maybe that's what recovery looks like, not forgetting, but learning to hold the memory differently. The attack happened. The scars are real, but they're not the whole story anymore. Let's go a little further, I suggest, feeling something tight in my chest begin to loosen. It's too nice a day to waste. The trail stretches ahead, dappled with sunlight and shadow. Somewhere in these mountains, a black bear goes about its day. Neither monster nor myth, just a wild creature in a wild place. We share these woods, predator and prey, separated by choice and chance and a can of bear spray on my hip. I take a step forward, then another. The fear doesn't disappear, but it changes shape, becomes something I can carry rather than something that carries me. Spring wind brushes my face, carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. After all, every trail is just one step at a time. Years pass, and the angry red lines on my arm fade to silvery white, tracking the passage of time like rings in a tree trunk. The scars have settled into my skin, becoming as much a part of me as my fingerprints or the color of my eyes. For parallel lines, each telling its own part of the story. What happened to your arm? A new colleague asks during a meeting, catching a glimpse as I roll up my sleeves. The question is innocent, curious. I pause, considering my answer. Time has smoothed the sharp edges of the memory, but hasn't dulled its essence. Bear attack, I say simply. Up in Shenandoah, a few years back. No way, he responds, eyes widening with the usual mix of horror and fascination. Like a real bear? I almost smile at that, as if there could be any other kind. The memory rises unbidden, glossy black fur, muscle rippling beneath, eyes that held neither malice nor mercy. Just hunger, just nature in its purest form. Sometimes, driving past the park entrance on my way to work, I catch glimpses of dark shapes moving through the trees. My heart still skips a beat, my hands still tighten on the steering wheel, but the panic attacks have faded, replaced by a more measured respect for what lives in those woods. The ranger's annual report that year listed no similar attacks. My encounter became a statistical anomaly, a footnote in the park's records. Sometimes I wonder if that bear still roams those slopes, if it remembers our encounter as I do, if it carries any marks from our brief, violent intersection. "Dad, tell me about the bear again," my daughter Emma asks one evening as I tuck her into bed. At 7, she's fascinated by the story, though I'm careful to edit out the more terrifying details. "Well," I begin, settling into the familiar rhythm of the tale. "I was hiking on a foggy morning, just like in your fairy tales. And the bear was huge," she interrupts, eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. "As big as our car." "Not quite that big," I laugh, though in my dreams it sometimes grows to mythic proportions. "But big enough." She reaches out to trace the scars on my arm, a gesture she's made since she was old enough to notice them. "Did it hurt?" "Yes," I answer honestly, "but the doctors fixed me up good as new. Just left these silver lines to remind me to be careful in the woods." "I want to go hiking," she declares, not for the first time. "I'm not scared of bears." "That's good," I tell her, smoothing her hair. "But being careful isn't the same as being scared. The woods are their home, and we're just visitors." After she falls asleep, I stand at her window, looking out at the dark tree line behind our house. The forest at night still holds mysteries, still whispers of tooth and claw, but it no longer paralyzes me with fear. Sarah finds me there, wraps her arms around my waist. "Bear story again?" She never gets tired of it, I say, leaning back against her, though I'm pretty sure the bear gets bigger every time I tell it. "Some stories are like that," she muses. "They grow with us." New hikers on the trail sometimes ask about the scars when they see them. Young backs straight with their store-bought gear, eyes bright with the invincibility of those who haven't yet learned what the wilderness can do. "Black bear," I explain, watching their expressions shift. "Right here on this trail." "But black bears are supposed to be shy," they often say, repeating the Park Service's official line. "They usually run away from humans." "Usually," I agree, letting them draw their own conclusions. Let them keep their certainties. The woods have their own rules, their own truths that can't be captured in pamphlets and warning signs. On quiet nights, when the wind moves through the trees just so, I can still feel the bear's presence in my dreams. Not as the monster of those first terrible months, but as something older, something that walks the boundary between our civilized world and the wild that still lives beneath the surface. The dreams are different now. Sometimes I'm running, yes, but sometimes I'm watching from a distance as the massive shape moves through misty trees. Sometimes we simply acknowledge each other, predator and prey, both belonging to the forest in different ways. My old hiking boots finally wore out, replaced by new ones that have logged hundreds of miles of their own. I still carry 2 cans of bear spray, still scan the trees out of habit, still feel my pulse quicken at unexpected movement in the undergrowth. But I keep walking the trails. "You know, the odds of being attacked twice are astronomical," my therapist once said, back when I was still working through the worst of it. "The odds of being attacked once were pretty astronomical," I reminded her. "Statistics don't mean much when you're the one." That's the thing about wilderness. It doesn't care about statistics or probabilities or human expectations. It simply is, in all its beauty and danger, as it has been since long before we started drawing lines on maps and calling pieces of it ours. The scars on my arm tell a story that few will ever fully understand. They speak of fog and fear, of teeth and claws and primal terror. But they also tell of survival, of the thin line between civilization and wilderness, of respect earned through blood and pain. Sometimes, standing at my daughter's window and looking out at the darkened forest, I think I catch a glimpse of something moving through the trees, a shadow darker than the others, a presence that reminds me of what waits in the wild places. And perhaps that's the real legacy of that October morning. Not the scars, not the nightmares that finally faded, not even the story that grows with each telling, but the knowledge, bone deep and permanent as the silver lines on my arm, that we are not so far removed from the wild as we like to think. The bear taught me that in blood and terror and desperate courage, and somewhere in the dark woods, it walks still, forever wild, forever untamed, carrying its own memory of the day our paths crossed in the fog.